Hey everyone, I'm Nick DiMatteo and welcome to week 217 and video episode number 43 of Music is Not a Genre. Each week I take a release or two from my collection, I discuss them, I give you my take on them, I throw in some other interesting information and connective tissue, and I connect it to my music and to things out there in the non-music world. If you like this podcast or my other podcast, Music is Everything, or any of the live or recorded music on this channel, please take a moment to subscribe. It would mean a lot to me. I don't know why I said it like that. It really does mean like subscribe, but it means a lot to me. Or if you know someone who you think might be interested in what I do and all this crazy music talk and all the stuff on here, please take a moment to either share this video or another video or share the channel itself and ask them to subscribe, join the family, you know. This week is the third of my four-part series on illusion. And remember, I have to do that. Contractually, I have to make those hand gestures in music and in art in general in the world. And this week is focusing in particular on sound manipulation, on the illusions that are created in the studio. And you know, that's why if you look below, I titled it Psychedelic Man, like so trippy. And you may know or not know why I would have chosen these two albums, which, let me just name them up front before I get back to them, because you know I like to go on. It is the 1968 album, eponymously titled Nas, from the band Nas, or The Nas, featuring among others Todd Rundgren, who's over here. Yes, I am the weatherman. He's the one all the way there on the left. And This is the Moody Blues, which is a collection of their singles and a couple of other things from 1974, so it chronicles the band's development from the mid-60s up until that point. Both bands have large psychedelic and studio manipulation elements in their music, so that's what kind of, you know, that's why they fit into this series. So this third of four parts. The fourth one will be this Saturday. So if you've been following along with my podcasts, you might know two things. One is that this is the third episode of this four-part series on illusion, and the second is that I love working in the studio. I love the studio. I love performing, I love writing, I love, you know, rehearsing, doodling and all that stuff, all of that. But the studio is where I really thrive. It's also true for the graphic design I do and stuff like that. It's just that idea of having kind of like a sandbox or a palette of things to use that put together to create something, right? And that's why this episode is about what can be done in the studio. But it's more than that. And you'll see that it goes beyond just, okay, you know, people can do pretty much anything in the studio. Let's go back a little, right? So from the beginning of recorded sound in the 1800s, late 1800s, engineers and artists have known it's not only possible to capture and preserve sounds of all kinds, but it's also possible and fun to manipulate those sounds. From the beginning, you know, and at first, the manipulation was just about kind of practical things like volume or clarity, or is it coming from the, left or right speaker, like eventually when stereo came in. And then it was about doing multiple takes and splicing those takes together to create one performance that was the ideal performance. So one great version of a song where someone, you know, performed great in the first half and not so great in the second half, or missed something in the, you know, solo or whatever, what have you, or vocal was better in one take than another, when it was all still single tracking. And then it became multi-tracking, 2 tracks, 4 and beyond, till it's almost infinite, depending on your processing power these days. And that became then about layering, about starting with, let's say, a live performance of something, whether it was one element of the band or orchestra or artist, or multiple together live, and then layering on top of that. And that points, all of that points to a huge, you know, part of what I'm talking about here, which is that all recording is illusion, all of it. And why? Because, okay, yes, there's a value to capturing sound as close to pure as possible. You want to kind of chronicle something, yes. But even that is an illusion, and it's because, you're capturing a live sound that is no longer live, but it sounds live. So it's a little bit of an oral trick. And that's the simplest level of what makes that an illusion. It's a way to trick the listener into feeling like they're hearing the performer in real time, and in ideal conditions, and with no barrier between them and the sound and the performer. And so that at base level means that all recording is an illusion of somehow. But of course we know, especially now, but through history, that it goes way further. Partly what I just talked about, the kind of steps into how much more complex recording has got, which means the ways to manipulate recording and create illusion have gotten more complex and more diverse as well. Now, a couple of years before these two bands debuted, really, I guess, sort of honestly, right around when the Moody Blues did debut, because I think they started in '64. Their first album was '65. So right around that time, '65, right? The Beatles got heavily into what could be possible and be done in the studio beyond what they could do live on a stage, and that's why we have Rubber Soul and Revolver and their work beyond that. But that's where it started, and that was around when other bands as well and other types of music started realizing that you could manipulate and layer and add elements, and maybe they used to use actual tape back then, and one day I'll show you, I have some from an old session of mine, and let's say reverse it and have a part played backwards or things like that, or cut it up in a way that made it kind of a collage like Tomorrow Never Knows, or For the Benefit of Mr. Kite, and things like that, sound collages and things. Just there's so many ways you can manipulate even back then when it was all analog. And that's when they really started kind of pioneering the idea that what happened in the studio no longer needed to be an exact representation of what happens or could happen live in a performance. It would take decades before performance technology would catch up to the point where things like that in the studio could be recreated live, and even then it's never quite the same. The studio has infinitely more, I think, possibilities of what you can do with sound, with music, with all of that, than live has. And these bands inherited that. There was that idea of psychedelic rock and et cetera, et cetera. And yeah, that's all. It's a kind of a very small version of what I'm talking about here, which is that let's take a voice and give it a flange or a chorus or a heavy reverb or an echo or delay or things like that, some of which exists in the real world and some of which really does not. Or you'd have to go thousands of miles or hundreds of miles to find that exact sound and be able to do all that in a small room, And so these bands, if you know anything about them, and honestly, I didn't know that much about Nas or the Nas. Either name apparently is correct. I don't understand. Other than that, Todd Rundgren co-founded, and he's famous as being kind of both pop, but also pop experimental, progressive pop, you could almost call it, songwriter who gained fame mostly in the 1970s. Like, I Don't Want to Work, I Want to Bang on the Drum All Day, I think was his big hit, but Hello, It's Me was another big one. Well, he started with this band, and this band was from Philadelphia, where I'm from, and from the beginning, they started from this album, 1968, this one here, started manipulating sound, and that's why they were kind of called psychedelic rock and all that. And the Moody Blues, you may know better, had a ton of hits from the 60s through the 80s, and they were known as kind of an orchestral rock or orchestral pop band, and from Britain, so from Philly, from Britain, and they did, Mellotron was one of the big sounds, the keyboards that they, used, they kind of helped to pioneer the use of, let's say. I'm not honestly sure it was the first, but they were one of the first. And that idea of creating not just a song or a production or an arrangement, but a sonic world, like, something that you could be immersed in, Brian Wilson with all his stuff. The Beach Boys certainly did that. His contingent of Beach Boys songs, and yeah, the Beatles and the Moody Blues were another band that really kind of reveled in that and thrived on on mixing actual orchestral sounds with rock band sounds with pop melodies and interesting words that could go from normal to weird, and then sounds, the manipulated sounds and electronic sounds like the mellotron, and then washing it all in various different kinds of effects, and somehow still making all of it work. But honestly, and I've said this before, because the songwriting was so good, and the performance was also very good, and they didn't get lost in the kind of psychedelic of what they were doing. They always grounded it in something and kind of made it, heartfelt in a lot of ways, or introspective, or this, that, and the other, and that's the thing that I think was the greatest trick, the greatest illusion of all of this, is that these bands are creating these sounds in the studio, which, when rock and roll started, it was the kind of thing where you went in and recorded an album in an entire day. You just did the songs that you did live, you did a couple takes maybe sometimes, and then boom, you were done. And then it was layering, as the years went on, to the point where it could take months or, years to finish an album, depending on so many factors. But I think the biggest factor, that kind of weighed in on that, was the fact that it was possible. That there were so many possibilities that you could start a song in 1 year and finish it 3 years later, and have added a million different things in between, or changed it, and what you end up with is so different from what you start with. Strawberry Fields is a perfect example. That was sort of more just like a folk song that was a little faster, and then they slowed it down. That's why when you listen to John Lennon's voice on there, you can hear that slower. He's got a bit of a lower pitch. They slowed the whole thing down and then added all the crazy stuff on top of the acoustic guitar and all of that. And that's something, man, the Moody Blues, I don't know if they did so much slowing down things, but they did a lot of that. Well, let's start with a simple song like this and layer it. Even a song as simple as Ride My Seesaw, which was before they really got into it, and that is on this album, has that element of manipulation to it. A lot of echo and things like that, and then sounds that you're not quite sure what they are until you really listen, and all of that. And again, this is just all in service of the fact that everything in art, not everything, but the vast majority of what goes into art is an illusion of some sort, is some kind of a trick, is some kind of a, starting with this and it becomes this, an illusion. Yes, that's right. I did do that hand gesture. And I'm actually going to get more into why that doesn't matter in the final episode this Saturday, part 4. So stick around for that. Now, like I said, I love the studio, and it's partly because I'm just free to do whatever and can come up with the best versions of things, but it's also because it's fun to manipulate. It's fun to say, I like that sound, but I kind of want it to be this. I kind of want the voice to be higher, or the keyboard to be more crunched and things like that. Just the way you can EQ something or put effects on something to manipulate it is just really exciting to me. I thrive on it. And it pushes me to kind of release what I think of as boundaries and create more and more interesting things, and things that go in directions I never thought I would have or could have years before. It's what I hear in my head, can I bring it out into the studio and into the world? And there are dozens of examples of this and the stuff I do, but to keep current, my band Rec's most recent EP, Symphony for the Weird, the opening track on there is a song called The Accumulate. And that is kind of a modern kind of electro psychedelic rock song. I recommend you listen to it to understand what I'm talking about. Matter of fact, I also did a cover of the Moody Blues song Lovely to See You, which had that same kind of electro rock psychedelic feel. And I included that link here too, so that you could, kind of compare the two and compare it to the original. And, you know, that's why all these links are there. So you can kind of research even further because, you know, in the end, I want to hear from you. I want to know what you think about all this. I want to think about my music, about the music of these bands and other great bands related to this. Do you remember Todd Rundgren? Do you remember Nas? Do you remember the Moody Blues? Do you know anything about them? Are you into obvious full-blown sound illusions like psychedelica or certain kinds of electronica, or do you prefer kind of the simple everyday illusion of all other kinds of music? Not all, most other kinds of music that are the simpler, like this is me playing a guitar. There's still an illusion to it. That's the point I'm trying to make here. I want to know what you think about all of this. Does it matter whether something is close to the bone, raw, real, quote unquote, or more tripped out and manipulated? Does it matter? Are you more interested in, you like the song, you like how it sounds? Please let me know in the comments below. I want to hear everything you have to think about this, whether you agree or disagree, like or hate any of this or me or what I'm talking about. I want to know, because as always, my objective here is music, conversation, and connection. Thank you so much for listening, for watching, for reading, for clicking, for sharing, for subscribing, and I'll see you next time.